In this video, we are going to discuss what is the OpenAI moderation model, and we will also discuss what are the different categories covered by the OpenAI moderation model. At the end, I'll also give you a quick demo of how we can check whether a text or an input prompt which is going to the OpenAI model is either harmful text or not. A moderation model is a tool provided by OpenAI which you can use to detect or identify whether this input text or prompt which you are going to pass to the OpenAI models is potentially harmful or not. So suppose you are going to try some maybe like a chemical explosion prompt, or maybe a self harmful text, or maybe it could be some harassment text, and the OpenAI can flag that prompt or that text and maybe it can ban you. So before going to all those issues, you can use the moderation model to check whether this text is harmful or not. The moderation endpoint is free and it does not count to your monthly usage, so you can use it without getting any charges. The moderation model classifies the following categories. So if your prompt is coming under these categories, which is the hate, harassment, self-harm, sexual and violence, the OpenAI moderation model will flag that text and you can know in advance that whether that text is potentially harm or not and under which category my prompt or my input text is coming. Now let's jump into the demo and see how we can identify a prompt before we are giving it to the GPT models. So here on my terminal, first I'll quickly set up a Python project for the moderation model. Then I'll switch to that project directory. Now I'll set up the Python virtual environment to hold all the dependencies. Now I'll activate this virtual environment. Next, I'll install all the required packages including OpenAI, python.env and notebook. Packages are installed and now I'll quickly create the .env file for holding the OpenAI API key. I'll open that env file and I'll paste my OpenAI API key here. I'll close this file and now I'll start my Jupyter notebook. Inside the Jupyter notebook, first I'll create a new notebook. I'll rename this notebook to OpenAI Modration. Next, I'll load the python.env library to load all the environment variables from the .env file. Now I'll call the actual function to load the environment variables from the .env file. Then I'll import the OpenAI library and next I'll instantiate the OpenAI client. Now let's start using the OpenAI moderation model. So I'll call it moderation. First, let's see the Voilence category and let's try some prompt to the OpenAI GPT model and see how the GPT model responds to that violent text. So I'll call it Voilence. And next I'll run this chat completion using the client.chat.completion. I'm calling the GPT-4o mini model and here I'm setting the role to user. Then I'm giving this prompt to the GPT model. Best methods to torture someone without getting caught. Potentially this is a harmful prompt. Let's see how the GPT models behaves with this prompt. This has executed successfully and now let's print the actual response what we have got from the OpenAI GPT model. So here you can see the GPT model says that I'm sorry, but I cannot assist you with that. The reason is because this method has some potential harm and the GPT model will never respond you to such queries. Now let's check this exact prompt with the OpenAI moderation model and see if the moderation model tries to mark this prompt whether it's a harmful or not. So here what I'm doing is that I'm using exactly that same OpenAI client, but instead of client.chat, I'm using client.moderations.create and then in the input I'm giving that same text input which I have given to the GPT model here. I'm trying this same input text. I just want to see if the OpenAI moderation model marks this text as potentially harmful or not. First I'll create the moderation and when I get the response from the moderation model, then I'll print its result here. So this is the response we have got from the moderation model. It has a moderation object. Under the moderation, we have all the categories: harassment, harassment threatening, and then we have hate threatening, violence, and all those categories. But we are just interested in this one thing first, whether this text is flagged or not. If this text is flagged as true, then this means that your input text is potentially harm. And if you want to see the exact category under which harmful category this input text is coming, I'll just run a quick quick loop here to print what category is marked as true. So here I'm looping through the results here and then on the categories, and now let's print each category, its value either true or false. So we can see it here, harassment is false, hate is false, sexual is false. If you can notice here, the violence category is marked as true, because if we look at our exact text input, this is actually coming under the violence category. So instead of communicating with the chat GPT models with your prompts, if you are concerned about whether my input prompt is potentially harmful or not, you can use the moderation model this way before you are sending the actual request to the GPT model to see whether this input prompt is potentially harmful or not. So this way, first you can check whether this is flagged true or not. If this is flagged true and you want to know about the category as well, you can loop through all the categories coming from the moderation response and you can see which category is marked as true. Now let's see one other category, which is self-harm. So I'll call this self-harm. And again, first I'll send the request to the chat GPT model, GPT-4o mini, and then I'll set my prompt to as I want to starve myself. So let's see how the GPT model responds to this input prompt. And now let's print the actual response from the GPT model. So now this is how the chat GPT model has responded, that I'm really sorry to hear that you are feeling this way. So the GPT model has not responded the way it responds, but it has given some suggestion that you need to talk to someone who can help you. And now let's check this prompt with the moderation model and see if this comes under some harmful category or not. So I run this script here, client.moderation.create, and I'm giving that same text input here, which I have tried before here with the GPT model. Now let's print the response. And here you can see the flagged is marked as true. So this means that this input text is potentially harm. And now if you want to print out all the categories and see under which category this potential harmful text is coming, we can loop through all the categories and then we can print the name and the value, which will be the category name and whether it's marked as true or false. So here you can see again, harassment is false, hate is false, sexual is false, violence is false this time. You can see here self-harm is true, because in this input prompt, I want to harm myself, as I've mentioned that I want to starve myself, and this here it has marked the self-harm category as true. Now let's see one other category, and this will be the last category we will be checking with the moderation model, and we will be checking the misinformation category. So I'll call it misinformation, and following that same pattern, first I'll check my input text with the GPT model to see how it responds to this input prompt, and then we will try it with the moderation model. So here I'm creating a chat completion again with the GPT-4o mini, and I'm giving this prompt that tips on spreading false medical advice for profit. So let's see how the GPT model responds to this chat completion. And now let's print the actual response. So here you can see the GPT model has apologized that I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that. Now let's see how the moderation model responds to this input prompt. So again, I'll create the moderation here by using client.moderation.create. I'm passing that same input prompt here. Then let's see the results. So now you can see the changed behavior here from the GPT and from the moderation. Like previously when we were testing with the GPT model was apologizing and the moderation model was marking that input prompt as flagged under some category. And this time you can see that the GPT model has apologized, but the moderation model has not marked this input prompt as flagged, whether potentially this could be harmful, because we are trying to get some tips on spreading false medical advice. And you know, if you are giving false medical advice to someone, that could potentially be harmful for that person. So now let's print all the categories and see why this is not coming under any category. So here we can see we have harassment, this is false, hate is false. Again, you can see all the categories are false. And the reason this is not marked as flagged true, we can see here under all the categories that no category is marked true, because if we look into our text prompt, this input prompt comes under the misinformation. If we see here all the categories, we don't have the misinformation category. So all these categories are marked false because the input text is not coming in any of these categories. categories. At this moment, the OpenAI moderation model does not cover the misinformation category. So this was all about the OpenAI moderation model and how we can check whether some text is potentially harmful or not, and under which category this input text is coming if the text is potentially harmful. Now what we are going to do in the next video, suppose I have an e-commerce store and the e-commerce store name is Codecraft Marketplace, and suppose I sent a request to the OpenAI GPT model that what is the return policy for the Codecraft Marketplace, and the GPT model will say, okay, I don't know about the Codecraft Marketplace, you can go search out the internet and see their return policy. So how we can make the GPT model in such a way that it can answer all the questions a customers or a client may have related to our business or e-commerce store. So in the next model we are going to customize our GPT model for our application, and for that the OpenAI has provided a solution called fine-tuning. So you can fine-tune an existing GPT model, and then the next time when you are questioning your fine-tuned model about your business or your some store, it will answer you exactly how you have trained that model. So see you in the next video.